We're very lucky to have back with us live in the studios this morning Larry Kalb. Larry Kalb was with us previously as president of Healthcare for All Washington and is with us this morning as a candidate for Congress running in the 2nd District here in Washington State. So tell us a little bit about yourself and why you are running for Congress.
Well, first of all, again, my name is Larry Kalb, and I live in Bellingham. I'm originally from Ohio. I grew up on a farm there, and in 1972, I had to make a decision whether to stay on the farm or go to college. And since we had our first oil embargo during that time, I thought it would be a better choice to go to college, get an education. So I got 2 degrees, went over to Europe, lived there for 11 years, and saw how good government can work for the people. And I presently work for Whatcom Community Transportation Authority, and I work in the finance department. And every month I look at the figures on the budget, and I can see where we have 2 huge problems. One is because of the lack of jobs, we don't have sales tax revenue coming in to support our operating funds. And the second problem is that we have healthcare inflation eating away at all of our operating funds. So when I looked at running for Congress, I could see that our current congressman, my congressman, wasn't addressing any of these issues. In fact, he was going just the opposite direction. He was shipping our jobs overseas, and then he voted for one of the biggest taxpayer giveaways in the history of the United States of America by approving the Health Care Reform Act. So I knew that giving the healthcare system over to the for-profit private insurance companies was not the answer. And so I just had to get in and say, you know what? We need a different voice in Washington, D.C., because I think my congressman has lost his nerve to stand up for the people. So that's where I'm from, and this is the reason why I'm running.
All right, so let's talk about the different issues that make up your platform. Start out with talking about jobs.
Exactly. That's my number one priority in this campaign. You know, the most sobering statistic that we have now is that more people are collecting unemployment checks than any time in United States history. And I was reading last night that your average worker has only $250 in his pocket, or in his bank account, rather, before he is laid off once again. $250. That's a scary place to be. When you're laid off from a job that you had just gotten and find that you don't have any money in your savings account, and then you have a mortgage to pay or rent to pay, a car payment, you have insurance to pay, and maybe, or maybe not, you have health insurance. And if you come down with, well, for example, I have an infected root canal, and I have to have that treated on Monday. But if I didn't have any insurance and I only had $250 in my bank account, I don't know if I could pay for that or not. So the economic stimulus package that was passed earlier last year really has not had any significant effect on unemployment. In fact, I think it probably moved down maybe 0.2%. From the original 10%, but that's not what we call a stimulus by any means. But you know, when unemployed people unemployed people simply cannot buy a house, they can't buy a car, and that's what stimulates our economy. And frankly, jobs is my number one priority, and the very first thing that we have to do is to make sure that the unemployed have benefits, unemployment benefits, so that they can continue to pay their rent, to pay their mortgage, to pay for food to put on a table. And so the Senate yesterday failed to extend those unemployment benefits. Now, that's going to affect millions of people. It's also going to affect the economy. Now, it would jump-start the economy in a slow way, but still we would have that money circulating within our economy. Now, the other thing that we also need to do is make sure that unemployed workers have health care benefits, and we need to extend the COBRA to them as well. And so that's the very first thing that we have to do. Now, the other thing that I would recommend, what I would propose in Congress as a congressman, is to have a WPA program for the unskilled workers in this country, much like we had back in the 30s while FDR was in office. So those unskilled workers, in my view, could go out and paint the schools, whack the weeds in the parks, whatever it may be, just to help out with some things that have been neglected because we have cut the budget here in the state or throughout the United States. The other thing that I would do is have a Public Works Administration program, PWA, so that we could put all of those engineers and architects and technicians back to work repairing our bridges, repairing the water and sewer systems that desperately need updating, and also the electrical distribution system, which is drastically overloaded. We could update that as well. So these two programs would give workers a chance to get back into society, earn a living wage, and we could jumpstart the economy that way. The other thing that I would do as a congressman is sign on to the Trade Act. Now, the Trade Act will renegotiate NAFTA, CAFTA, WTO, and Fast Track. This is desperately needed because in my district, we need jobs in Bellingham, not in Beijing. We need jobs in Marysville and in Oak Harbor, in Everett, and in Mount Vernon, all over the district and all over the United States, frankly. So, you know, people will be able to listen to this program on their computer, but I want to ask them, where is their computer made? And if they wanted to telephone someone and say, hey, did you hear about this guy Larry Kalb who's running for Congress? They get out their cell phone, and I want to ask them, where was their cell phone made? Well, if they look into it, they're going to find that it's made in China. But if we have our products made in China, the workers and the manufacturers over there pay their taxes in China. That sales tax stays in China, and it doesn't help pay for Social Security and Medicare. Now, President Obama has a commission to look at the deficit, and he's looking specifically at Social Security and Medicare. And quite frankly, I'm a little bit concerned about Social Security because the people that he has on this commission are some of the ones who want to reform Social Security. They want to put it into the private hands. And we've already had this discussion in previous years, and we cannot hand over our hard-earned money to Wall Street because we know, for example, that Wall Street cannot insure our retirement. But Social Security also include beneficiaries who are disabled. In fact, about 10 million people in the United States under the age of 65 receive Social Security benefits because of disability of one sort or another. We also have children whose parents have died, and they receive benefits from Social Security. But the majority of the recipients of Social Security are those workers who have retired, and they depend on Social Security for their retirement. And if we didn't have Social Security, we would have 50% more elderly living in poverty than we normally would. So that's the reason why Social Security was implemented in the first place, so that our older folks, our parents over the age of 65 wouldn't have to live in poorhouses if they didn't have children of their own to take care of them or move in with them. So, we have got to bring the jobs back here to the United States. And frankly, what I really want to see in the United States of America is a product that says, made in the U.S. of A. by Americans. Now, if you put on your shoes this morning, I bet you that they were not made in the United States. I bet that they were made in China. And I, as congressman, will put forth a piece of legislation saying that we need to have tariffs on all of the cheap articles coming from Asia so that our manufacturers, our small businesses aren't undermined here. We need a level playing field for the workers here in the United States of America, and I think that's fair. Germany, for example, 4 months ago was the leading exporter in the world. And why is that? They had tariffs on all of those imports coming into their country so that their car manufacturers were not undermined by cheaper cars coming from China or Japan. And so I think that is a wise policy decision, and that's what we have to do in the United States of America. China also has tariffs on all imports coming into their country. I think that we need to have the same program as all the other countries so that we protect their manufacturing base. In addition to that, I think whenever our government hires a manufacturer, that we have regulations that say that all of those products should be domestically bought. So a buy domestic program, I think, is imperative to make sure that our economy keeps going. So the premise of my campaign is that this country needs a lot of jobs. We need 14 million jobs to take us where we were back to the 2007 level, just to stay even with the unemployment rate of 4%. And the economic stimulus package doesn't make it on that account. We need something very bold, and Congress needs Congress people there to take a bold step. And my congressman, I feel, has lost his nerve to stand up for the working folks here in the district. And it's time that we change that person in that seat and put me there, because I know where I'm from, and it took me a long time to get where I'm at. And we don't need a congressman who has pledged his allegiance to the corporations and shifting the money that we make over to the for-profit private industries that have absolutely no allegiance to the working class whatsoever. So that's my take on the job situation.
All right. Talk about where some of the money for these programs would come from and your stance on the U.S. military interventions.
That is an excellent question, Mike, and I'm glad you brought that up. First, the one thing that I would do is put forth a proposal to kill the tax benefit for the rich that George Bush put in long ago. I think it's been devastating for this country. They don't need any tax cuts. In fact, some of the richest Americans in the United States have already come out to say that they don't need any tax cuts. So the one thing that I would do is vote for any measure that says that the tax cuts are coming to an end. It's just wiped out the United States. The other thing that I would do, and you can count on me as a congressman to not to vote for any more emergency war funding or any more supplementals for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I will not give a dime to either one of those adventures. These wars are unwinnable. They have absolutely no plan to win the hearts and minds of the Iraqis and the Afghanis. And frankly, we're just pouring money down a hole in this case. And as congressman, I will put forth a piece of legislation that says that we're going to cut the defense budget by 20%. And that 20% savings we're going to put into Medicare and Social Security. We're going to put into repairing the infrastructure of this country. For example, the roads and bridges that I had spoken about before. Also make sure that those graduates from high school can go to college, but they won't have to forfeit 4 or 5 years down the road after they graduate for paying high tuition. So that savings is definitely what we need to bring our country back online so that we have a prosperous future rather than borrowing on the future of our grandkids. So the war has just been devastating for our economy. Every single cent that we spend on that war is borrowed money. And frankly, the money that we have borrowed is going to be paid back by the grandchildren of those veterans who have fought 2 or 3 or 4 tours in Iraq or Afghanistan. We have not finished paying for the war in World War II. We are Japan's #1 defense force. We have not finished paying for the Korean War. We have not finished paying for Vietnam. We have not finished paying for the war, the first Gulf War, and all of those little countries that Reagan invaded. We have a huge debt, and we need to also close those bases in Iraq and Afghanistan upon departure and convert those bases into hospitals and schools as a good faith measure to the people of Iraq and Afghanistan. In addition, I would also close the 700 or more bases that we have around the world in 130 countries. It's a huge drain on our economy. Rick Larson has also authorized purchase of the F-35s. He has also authorized purchase of more Growler aircraft, which is an aircraft to jam the radio waves. It's an outdated aircraft at this point. 10 years ago, it was being designed and it served its purpose, but that aircraft was designed to go into Russian airspace, jam their radio waves, but we can do that with drones now. But he approved funding for 26 more of these aircraft. That is pure pork. It's a waste of money. One Growler cost $70 million. Now, I work in public transportation. If we could have $70 million to help with the operation of public transportation up and down the I-5 corridor, that would give a lot of operating funds to our public transportation. And frankly, that's what we need right now. We need to get more cars off the streets, off the roads, and put in public transportation. So back in 2002, I was in front of the Bellingham City Council and had a resolution saying, let's not go to war in Iraq in the first place. That resolution failed by one vote. I got with others in 2006, specifically Marie Marchand and Jean Marks, and also Doris Kent, who had lost a son in Iraq. And we got together and we said, let's call for the troops to come home. That resolution passed unanimously, and it also made Bellingham the first city in Washington State to call for the troops to come home. Now, I believe that we should have a withdrawal plan, a timeline that says specifically when our troops are coming home. Barack Obama said the summer of 2011. But after having read some articles in the Asia Times just last week, I can see where that timeline is not going to be honored, because we're sending more troops into countries like Tajikistan. We're training their troops there for defense purposes, and we've got all kinds of programs going on around Afghanistan. So I don't think that we have any plan to exit Afghanistan anytime soon. And that worries me, because we cannot afford these wars at all. So, yeah, the people, the voters in the 2nd Congressional District can count on me to not vote for any more war in Iraq and Afghanistan. I will vote for funding to bring our troops home.
And very briefly, for those unfamiliar, we didn't clarify at the beginning, 2nd District is what? Snohomish, Whatcom?
Yep, the entire area north of King County, all the way up to the Canadian border, and Island County as well as San Juan County.
All right. So in that area, you've got, in terms of defense-related facilities, you've got, Boeing doesn't produce any defense stuff at their Everett plant, but Boeing's a big defense contractor. And then you've got Whidbey Island Naval Air Station, some smaller bases in there as well.
Exactly, right.
So it's a fairly heavily militarized area in a way.
It is, and I toured the Everett Naval Base. I went on a tour of the Abe Lincoln aircraft carrier. Quite an impressive piece of technology there, I must say. I also toured the Whidbey Island Air Base, and there was a captain there who did explain the purpose of the Prowler aircraft, which is a 40-year-old aircraft, and he says this aircraft is maintained so well that if we get a call to go somewhere, we're off and running. And I thought to myself, it would be nice if we had some social programs for those people who have lost their jobs and been unemployed for an extended period of time, that we have programs for them that would allow them to be off and running. We shouldn't prioritize entirely our military. I would love to see a good balance there, and right now we don't have that balance, because I believe that we as taxpayers have sacrificed a lot to the military budget, and we have families who are falling in the cracks, and I believe that the value of families are not as valued as we should be, because the strength of our country is based upon the strength of our families. And the stronger our families here in the United States, the stronger our country. And so I would make sure that the weakest link is the strongest link in the United States, and families have to be supported financially. So, I'm very worried, I'm very concerned that those members of our military service who have already served 3 or 4 terms are not getting the medical attention that they need. I know that there has been a clinic set up in Mount Vernon. I've heard a lot of complaints that it is just a clearinghouse for the Veterans Administration here in Seattle. Sure, they can have some medical procedures done in Mount Vernon, but not the ones that people are depending on. And so they have to make an extra trip to come down to Seattle, whereas now they stop in Mount Vernon, and then they are told that they're going to have further checkups in Seattle, and some of the veterans really do need critical attention at this point because they have suffered either a brain injury of some sort or a wound that needs attention, and their matters cannot wait. So I'm also concerned for those families left behind when their loved ones are on the front line because they don't have the income coming in to sustain them over the long haul. And most of these families are living in poverty as well. So I'm very concerned that they're not being cared for properly, and I want to make sure that when I'm in Congress that there are no third or fourth tours for our military. And I'm also very concerned about the private contractors, some of whom now are hiring people from Sierra Leone who are not Americans, and they have no allegiance to the United States of America, and if they commit any crimes, war crimes, that they will not be held accountable, and that is very worrisome to me. So, yep.
All right, we only have a couple minutes left. So how would you deal with the overwhelming influence of corporations there in D.C.?
Oh!
You can answer that in 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, we need to stop the revolving door, first of all, of lobbyists going into congressmen's offices, handing them legislation and say, hey, get this passed and we'll give you some money for your campaign. We need to get the corporations out of our government. Frankly, having lived in Europe for 11 years, what I would do is make sure that elections are no more than 6 weeks long, and that the political parties have restrictions on how much money they can use for each candidate. The political parties then would nominate their candidate, put them up for office for an election, and then when you get your ballot, you'll see the Republican candidate, the Democratic candidate, the Socialist candidate, the Tea Party candidate, and then you will also have a choice there that says none of the above. And I think the American people will have a choice of who they want to put in office, but it will also make sure that our Congress people are working on our matters and not sitting back in their office dialing for dollars to see how much money they can get for their campaigns. So there is legislation in Congress that says, let's get the money out of our election system. I'm all for it. I don't think it's strong enough, but I do think that we should have other regulations. We should also reform media so that we don't have any hysteria propagated by the commercial television stations. We need to have objective, factual information so that the citizens of the United States can make intelligent decisions on who to elect to Congress. So,
we are speaking with Larry Kalb. He is a candidate for Congress here in Washington State in the 2nd District. And how can people find out more about your campaign?
Well, they can go to my website, Kalb, K-A-L-B, for Congress, and they can look at where I stand on the issues. They can also contribute online. And Kalb for Congress is where you'll find all the information about my campaign.
All right. Well, with that, we're unfortunately out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us this morning.
Thanks again, Mike, for having invited me.